right, everyone, welcome back straight from our lunch break into the future. We are now entering our next innovation area, future of mobility and cities. And I must say, it feels a lot like there's a lot of things happening in mobility now. New forms of how we are traveling, of how we are moving around in cities. Cities are changing. I'm coming from Munich. There's a lot changing already. Berlin, there's a lot changing. But I would say there's still a long way to go. So I'm really looking forward to our discussions now. So Laura, what's going to happen in our next innovation area?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for the next person we were going to welcome on stage. It's Sandra Phillips, and she is a so-called shared mobility architect. And if you don't know what that is, I can share an example with you. I can share it literally. So I live in Berlin, and I love Car2Go, or now it's Share Now. But back then, Sandra was actually involved in building up these shared mobility concepts all over the world. She's been in Vancouver, she is lecturing at the University of St. Gallen, and she has also been the reason why I love Car2Go. I love it in Berlin, I can go to Frankfurt, I have it here. So thank you so much, Sandra, for being here and informating us about how we can reorganize infrastructure within big cities, metropolitan areas. Sandra, the stage is yours.
Yes, warm welcome and big applause for you, Sandra.
Thank you. Ooh, not quite so loud. 30% of greenhouse gas emissions are produced by personal transportation. So I think it's high time we change that. And how do we do that? How do we get masses of people out of their own personal cars into alternatives? Well, I think if we repurpose the infrastructure that we've built over the last decades and put it towards more sustainable modes. My name is Sandra Phillips. I am the founder and principal at MoveMe, a small boutique agency based in Vancouver, Canada, focused on shared mobility. I have worked in the last 11 years, I've worked on over 60 projects that are about shared mobility, from micromobility, introducing the first electric moped share in New York, to numerous car shares, all the way from Hawaii to Dubai and anywhere in between. And in the last couple of years, I've really focused on integrating these new forms with public transit better to build what I call the Swiss Army knife of transportation. Essentially, you have one tool for whatever you need to do and however you want to get around. Hold on. As I said, I'm based in Vancouver. I'm originally Swiss. So in 2008, I moved to Vancouver. And Vancouver at the time, I couldn't even get from the airport downtown without a friend in a car picking me up. Today, I have access to almost 3,000 car sharing vehicles. I have access to about 2,000 bike sharing cycles. And we have one of the best public transit networks. Before the pandemic, ridership grew year over year. So I have seen, I'm not just believing that shared mobility is a tool in shifting people out of their personal cars. I actually have seen a city transform itself. I will share how they've done that in a minute, but before I do that, I want to get a couple of things out of the way. And the first one is the definition of shared mobility, because there's different ones out there. When I talk about shared mobility, I talk about the shared use of a vehicle, and it doesn't matter if it's a motorcycle, a cycle, a car, a bus, when and if you need it. You have access to it on a short-term basis, and really, it gives you the same amount of freedom as your own personal car. So you have access to education, to healthcare, to your workplace, to shopping and your friends. So I want you to close your eyes for a second, because I want to move on to the infrastructure piece. Close your eyes and think about a piece of infrastructure that is tied to personal transportation. You can open your eyes again. I'm pretty sure most of you saw something like this. Most people see lanes and lanes of cars driving around. And, you know, everybody tells me if you add another lane for a couple of months or maybe a year, you don't have as much traffic jam, and then a year later you have it again. So if we build it, they will come. People will naturally follow. For the first part of my career in shared mobility, I was like, if we build shared mobility services, people will come. Well, not quite. I brought a friend of mine, the big bad wolf, with me, and I'm going to share a couple of examples where it didn't work out quite as well.
Little pigs went out one day. One built a house made out of hay. The other pigs thought it would fall, 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 but the first didn't care at all. Then came a wolf who was big and bad. He was incredibly hungry and mad. The three little pigs saw the wolf that day. They slammed their doors and hid away.
Little pig, let me in.
Not by the hair on my chinny chin chin.
And I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow, blow, blow.
Boy, did the hay house go.
Little pigs, let me in.
Not by the hair on our chinny chin chins.
Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow, blow, blow.
Boy, did the stick house go.
So, not quite as successful, and there's many reasons. We can blame cities for overregulating these nervous services, but if you look at the core, it's always around infrastructure. So the very first example, the micromobility example in Kelowna, if you haven't been to Kelowna, it's a beautiful wine city in British Columbia. Very car-centric, very few bike lanes. They introduced micromobility, these kick scooters. Well, people don't feel safe riding on the roads, so they're riding on sidewalks, which is one of the reasons this whole story went sideways very quickly. And now there's one provider instead of 5 after just a couple of months. Second example was Car2Go in San Diego. First large-scale electric car sharing scheme in North America. Problem was, infrastructure wasn't built out enough, charging infrastructure, and when it was built out with the personal vehicle owner in mind, not with a shared system in mind. The third example was San Francisco Drive Now, shut down because the city didn't give them access to the parking spots that everyone who owns a car gets access to. So in a lot of cases, as much as shared mobility is the antidote to personal vehicle ownership, in my experience, it also requires a behavior change, and not just on the individual level, also on a community level. So now I'm going back to Vancouver and show you 3 examples of how they made it happen. Instead of over-regulating, or I call it over-regulating and telling people what not to do, which results in residents or users that get frustrated, and then the services don't become viable and companies need to shut down, or people just don't comply, people and companies just don't comply, do whatever they want, which we also don't want. They've taken an approach that we at MoveMe call shared mobility architecture, and they started nudging people through providing easy and attractive access to infrastructure that they already had. So let's have a look at the first example. I'll give you 3 examples. Very first one, in 2010, the city of Vancouver put the very first segregated bike lane in place. They took a lane from the cars and put a barrier up. I can tell you it was highly controversial. The mayor did it overnight because he didn't want to deal with all, the backlash. It just happened that at a time I just started with Car2Go, and we were looking at whether or not Vancouver was a good market to start. And I had a number of executives from Germany, from Daimler, in the city, and I was showing them around, and I was very proudly pointing out to this new bike lane. They were like, why did they build a bike lane? Nobody's on it. Well, today, I'm happy to report that on a daily basis, 40,000 bicycle trips go over this bridge. And that's an average. During the winter months, we say in Vancouver it rains once from October until March. So in the winter months it's a lot less, and in the summer months it's more. The city also managed to shift people out of their personal owned cars onto cycles, and today 7% of all trips are on cycles. Now the second example is the shared mobility example. City of Vancouver also committed to making shared mobility attractive, specifically in this case, car sharing. And what they've done is they repurposed the parking spots. When I'm a car sharing member, obviously, when I go and visit my friend across town, I can leave the car sharing car outside her house, in front of her house, in the residents only zone, which you as a personal car owner can't do. So they made it more attractive. I can also leave it at a meter, and I don't pay for it. Now, I want to put a caveat around that. The operators pay for this privilege. They pay a discounted rate, but they pay a bit for this, and obviously I pay through the hourly and per minute rates for it. But what that has done is actually astonishing. When I started in 2010 working for Car2Go, there were 7,500 people with a membership to CarShare. Today, we have over 200,000 people with a membership. What that also has done, because the city wants to see, okay, does that even have an impact, and does it remove cars from our roads? Yes, it has. A quarter of the members got rid of one of their cars, which means 50,000 cars less. Another 40% didn't buy one because they have access to CarShare. That's another 80,000 cars. It's 130,000 cars not moving around on the City of Vancouver's road. Now, the last example I want to share is when you tie all this infrastructure together, all these transportation services, what that impact can be. So we've been involved in a pilot project called Shared Mobility Compass Card. We essentially used the existing fare card and turned it into an access token to all the other modes. It was a pilot granted, but the pilot ran right through the pandemic, and the people that were part, 60% of them said, and it was all work-related, it was targeting work-related travel, so your business meeting trips. 60% of the people that were part of the pilot replaced their personal vehicle with a shared mobility option, whether it was bike share or public transit or car share, didn't matter, they replaced it. 30%, and I think this is really important, this number, tried a new form. There were 30% of people who had never been in public transit before, and they tried it for the first time. Making it easy and attractive and convenient helps them to try it out, and then you actually figure out whether or not it works for you. So, how do we get people out of their own cars, and how do we reduce greenhouse gases tied to our personal transportation? We have to make it easier, more attractive. We have to we essentially have to create a social movement. You know, 200,000 people in Vancouver, if you go to a party, there is probably half of the room that came with a shared mobility option. And we have to give people choice. Timely means if the bike-sharing bike is not available and the bus is not coming, you do have a car-sharing car, because if you don't, you buy a car and rely on that again. And to do this well, one of the tools that we have and that we can tap into is the existing infrastructure. We just got to repurpose it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you learned a lot about the next topic. And we have a wizard on stage now. And I don't want to talk too much because he, first of all, is a wizard now. He just told me. And he also has a magical trick for us. So before I mention your name, maybe come on stage, because that's a little bit more mystical. And maybe introduce yourself. I heard you're a wizard. So who are you?
Yeah, my name is Marc of the Brömmelstroet, and I will teach everybody in the room who wants to a magical trick.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but the trick has one thing. If you, it will make you see something that you cannot unsee. So if you're uncomfortable with that, you can still leave.
Okay, I'm curious. So maybe I leave the stage with you now, and you're going to be prepared for some magic.
Yes, thanks. Well, this is also the first time I'm giving a lecture without having to ask if I'm unmuted or if you can see me. I think we can all see each other. So I want to use this moment to teach you a trick. And it starts with all of you. I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand. So all of you, you raise your right hand. Great, awesome, that's easy. Okay, so I'm going to ask you first 2 questions. And you can lower your hand if you do not agree. Okay? So the first question is, do you think we need a radical change in mobility? Okay, so that's good. Good audience so far. The second one is, do you personally want to make an impact on that? Great, all of you, you're still here. So now I'm going to ask you to stand up. I'm going to ask you to stand up, everybody, because otherwise this doesn't work. And now the magical trick comes. Keep your hand raised to the ceiling. Look at your hand. I'm going to ask you to now make a circle clockwise. It's very easy. So look at your hand and make a circle clockwise. And I'm going to check if you can all do that. It's very easy. It works everywhere around the world in the same way. Okay, so keep doing that. Keep looking at your hand and keep turning it clockwise. It's very important. Now, I'm going to ask you to slowly lower your hand, but keep turning it clockwise. Lower your hand. Keep turning it clockwise. Lower your hand. Now it's in front of your face, and you're still making a clockwise circle. Okay, keep doing that, and now lower your hand further. Further, further. Now look at your hand. What is the direction your hand is turning? This is the magical trick. You can sit down now. And the trick is important because it shows you that perspective matters. I hope you all saw that by turning your hand down, you actually turn it into a counterclockwise movement. And your perspective matters. That's what I want to talk with you about. I want to tell you a story today, and I want to teach you another trick. And the trick is that language matters. The language that we speak is not a mirror of reality. The language that we speak profoundly shapes the way that we see reality and the way that we shape reality. My story starts with this old building in my own town, which is an old canteen of a factory of 4,000 people that were eating sandwiches there once upon a time. And now this factory is turned into an elementary school. The elementary school is going to house 250 children. And when that plan was presented, the neighborhood received this map. And this map showed us, this is the sort of the outside area around the elementary school in the middle of our neighborhood. On the right, you see the old building. That's the gray rectangle, and the triangle, the black triangle, that's where the children are entering and exiting the school. And I want you to focus here on the yellow part of this graph. The yellow part is the playground. Can you see how many square meters the playground is? It's 755 square meters. Do you remember how many children were going to the school? 250. So how many square meters? You can also again raise your hand. How many square meters per child? 3, yeah. Some engineers in the room. Great. We have 3 square meters per child, and actually, if you go into the norms and the guidelines, this is exactly what is the guideline in the Netherlands. We need at least 3 square meters of playground per child. So actually, we have 5 square meters to spare here. But if you go a bit deeper, you will find that in the Netherlands, if you're going to buy eggs, and the eggs are eggs of a biological chicken, the biological free-range chicken can only be called a biological free-range chicken if it had at least 4 square meters of outside space. So what happened? How did we end up in a situation where we give our children 1 square meter less than we give our chicken? And of course, does that have anything to do with our mobility system? This has to do with the language. What we have been looking at is a visual language. It's a map with norms and guidelines, but it is a language that we have sort of inhabited to talk about public space. And language here, very simply said, does 3 things. Language is by definition a simplification of reality. It simplifies reality, and we cannot live without that. We cannot live without simplifying complex reality. 2, in simplification, language makes arbitrary choices. We make choices to talk about this complex phenomena of reality in a way that makes us focus on certain things and makes us ignore other things. And those choices are arbitrary. But the third element, and that's really crucial here, the third element of language is that language is performative. It is not a mirror of reality. Language profoundly shapes our reality. So I'm going to ask you now, describe this. If somebody wants to try to describe the picture that we're looking at. You can just shout. I normally ask to do it in the chat, but you can't do that now, so you have to shout. A deer. Anything else? A road. A forest, yes. Can you make a sentence of that? Yes. Yeah, that's what you hear a lot. That's a very good description, a very valid description. There's a deer crossing the road in a forest. But I will show you that this is already a choice, a simplification of this reality that you can also describe in many other ways. Yeah? Great. Yes, that's also possible. That's a road going through the habitat of the deer, right? And that choice is profound because it makes us see certain problems and think about certain solutions. So as I said, this language is a very important trick, and we need to become aware of how the language of mobility is actually simplifying our understanding of mobility, and also as influencing the way that we are designing solutions for mobility. For instance, the shared mobility we heard before. This performativity, very simply said, you can see all around you. The best example of this comes from a book by James Scott. And he shows us that the example of the forest. A forest was always a very complex thing. A complex ecosystem with all kinds of balancing feedback loops. And a forest also, because of that, serves all kinds of purposes. You can hide, you can hunt, you can build a nest as an animal, you can play and you can grow. So there's all kinds of flora and fauna in a typical primeval forest. But this radically changed in the 1800s. Because at that time, wood became a very important fuel, an important resource, and an important building material. And to cope with that, to govern that, large owners of forests, they asked scientists to come up with a language that helped them to govern their forests. And they came up in Germany, German scientists came up with the concept of the Normalbaum, the standard tree. And the standard tree helped us to understand what would be a perfect tree for the production of wood. With this language became performative. This language started to shape the way that we were dealing with forests. And today, you can walk around Europe and you can see that. This is a production forest. A forest that has been shaped around this notion of the Normalbaum. 2 rows of standard trees that are optimized for wood production, but are actually excluding all kinds of other goals of this forest. Try to hunt here, or try to hide, try to build a nest. All kinds of animals are no longer welcome in our production forests. And very importantly to remember for later, that the actual production value of a production forest is actually lower than the primeval forest. Due to a simplification, these forests became very vulnerable, as you can see in Germany in the Harz, or in Sauerland, where only one bug can basically destroy 50% of your forest. The same thing happened, now we're going into mobility. The same thing happened with our streets, that's my argument. In the 1920s, our streets were still also a primeval street. A street that served all kinds of different purposes. This is a street only 100 years ago where you can see people trading, buying, selling, meeting each other, playing and traveling in the 1920s. And this was over the millennia of city building. The street was seen as the remaining space between buildings. But this radically changed. A huge pressure came on the street, and that pressure was created by the mass introduction of the motorized vehicle. And this literally collided with the way that we were understanding the street. At first, the conversation about this was a conversation around the language of justice. And it was seen as completely unjust that especially children were violently killed by this new innovation at the time. 1920s. At that moment, nobody was thinking that the car would start to dominate our cities. But it took only 10 years to come up with a new language that shaped the reality that we are now living in. In 10 years, the discussion about the street became a discussion of efficiency, control, and freedom of the individual. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 1930s, traffic engineering was born. And traffic engineering's language started to solidify into norms, into guidelines, into models, into institutions, into behavior, into concrete, into asphalt, into steel, into innovations, and in the end, it started to solidify our imagination. Our current language of talking about mobility is strongly solidified by the notions of 100 years ago. The freedom of the individual driver. And that's what you see if you go outside here. Just across the road here, there's a big Jeep dealer. So we are talking here about saving the world. Outside our streets, we tend to think about them in terms of efficiency, instead of thinking about them in terms of justice. So very quickly, what is this language traffic engineering uses? First, they borrowed language from water management, the street as a pipeline. They borrowed language from biology, the traffic as an artery system. And in Dutch, you even have the word infarct, a sort of a clogged system when there's congestion. So this whole notion that this system should never, ever be stopped because of the bloodstream of the body. Then they started to borrow from physics, gravity models, and the whole notion that humans interact as if they are particles that collide. That's where this idea comes from. The friction-free, conflict-free intersection where everybody has his or her own space, and every time you interact, there's a system, a machine that helps you. The traffic light. Also very importantly, we started to believe that humans are homo economicus. Humans are underway to go from A to B, and being underway is a disutility, something you want to minimize at all costs. And that's what resulted in the roads that we see outside. Because of this language, we tend to still, to this day, think about ways to optimize the machine and marginalize the human, to develop a future that is even more seamless and friction-free and easy to use, to go even easier now with shared mobility, to go from the same A's to the same B's, because being underway is still seen as something of a disutility. And this is not only the case in car-based thinking. We all know the Hyperloop, we all know the tunnel vision of Elon Musk that wants to put us in tunnels under the city. But you also see this, for instance, in the world of cycling innovations, where cycling innovations increasingly also become about a future where cycling is friction-free, seamless, easy, comfortable, speed pedelecs, bicycle super cycle highways. This makes us stuck in the same language, and just as with the production forests, I would argue that our production streets are not reaching the goal that we originally wanted. Wood production in the production forest was actually lower, remember? And travel time, the notion that we want to save travel times for the individual utility optimizing homo economicus is actually over time not leading to travel time savings, but instead making our distances longer. So instead of saving travel time, we are increasingly maximizing our travel distances. So this language, the language that our streets need to be as friction-free as possible, leads us not to save travel time underway and use that time, that saved time for other purposes, but instead makes us, with the same travel time, travel further and further. Sorry. Okay, but I came here as a wizard and not as the grumpy man next door, because I think the trick that we just learned is a very powerful trick. Because if we really want to radically change something, if we really want to radically change the way that we think about urban mobility, we have a very powerful tool. We have the tool of language, but we need to become aware of it. We need to stop accepting the radical monopoly that being underway is a disutility that needs to be minimized. Because that will only lead to new kinds of streets that have the similar logic that we try to shed away with. if we think that radical change is needed, we have to put the choices of our language central on the stage. We need to, because otherwise we end up in venues like this with the same worldviews, the same ideas, the same people, the same companies that tell us that we are changing something. But we are not changing something if we do not question the underlying foundation of our thinking. Right? We're just replacing the current mobility narrative and we put the word nachhaltig, sustainable, in it. But is this really radically changing the way that we engage mobility?
Now, the beauty of linguistic diversity is that it reveals to us just how ingenious and how flexible the human mind is. Human minds have invented not one cognitive universe, but 7,000 or 7,000 languages spoken around the world. And we can create many more. Languages, of course, are living things, things that we can hone and change to suit our needs. I've told you about how speakers of different languages think differently, but of course, that's not about how people elsewhere think. It's about how you think. It's how the language that you speak shapes the way that you think, right? And that gives you the opportunity to ask, why do I think the way that I do? How could I think differently? And also, what thoughts do I wish to create?
What thoughts do you wish to create? Think about that before just accepting the ways that we think about it. And what happens when you do that? I strongly believe that what happens is that we will become aware that there are radical choices to be made now that will result in radically different futures over time. Alternatives that have radical different effects on individuals, on societies and on cities. And alternatives that we have to choose between. And these choices are not value-free technical choices. These are choices that are radically political, that need to be on the political agenda. And then we realize that there are actually multiple urban mobility futures. Sure, we can choose to make our work around how to make even more friction-free, seamless, efficient, travel time savings machines. Sure, we can do that, but we can also choose to create friction-rich, valuable, interactive and social streets where being on the way is actually meaningful, and anything in between, right? And that's the choice that we need to make right now. Because if we do not make the choice right now, this is what we end up with. In the current narrative, the main question that we ask about our public space is, how do we get our children safely to school in a car-dominated environment? And the best possible answer to that question is with a kiss and ride facility that allows parents to drop off their children at school. That's the blue part here. That blue part is 1,100 square meters. 1,100 square meters that we just give away because we think that this is the only question that we should ask. So what happens if we ask a different question? What happens if the street doesn't belong to traffic engineering but belongs to all of us? What happens is that we then can change the question. We change the question in what is the role of cars in the living environment of our children? And you will be amazed how many people will support you in finding the answer to that question. The answer to that question is, cars are an unwelcome guest in the living environment of our children. And because of that, you come to radically different solutions. And now I'm very proud that I'm actually working on a 2,000 square meter playground for my children with huge support from the parents and the people around it. If we think that we want radical change for mobility, we need to become aware of our language, because our language is not a mirror of reality, but our language profoundly shapes that reality. So if you think that radical change is needed, it's not enough to go out there and change the answers. And it's not enough to go out there and change the questions either. If you want radical change, what we want to do is to radically change the underlying worldview. And to do that, you can practice. You can practice the trick at home. Maybe mobility is not only about making things easier and more seamless. Maybe it's about being underway as something valuable. And maybe our streets are not there to optimize the machine. Maybe the streets are there to optimize a thriving humanity. And maybe maybe mobility is not only about strengthening the Homo economicus, but strengthening the Homo ludens, the playful human. These are choices that you all have to make. And I wish you the best of luck. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So we learned about language, and we learned about changing the perspective and using new vocabulary to really change our minds and have a bigger impact. And now we're gonna ask ourselves a question, and this question is, what drives us tomorrow? So what drives us is a very subjective question, I would say. There are so many different things that can motivate us, keep us going. But if we speak it technically, there is a car, there is a bicycle, but there are also bigger challenges we have to face when we're talking about sustainability and the climate crisis. And this is the aviation sector, this is boats and ships. So what about them? How can we really change and impact our climate system with this? And the question, what drives us tomorrow, will we be answering shortly in our next upcoming panel. And therefore I have three amazing experts, and I welcome you on stage. I start with you, Alyssa. Alyssa Kritt. Thank you so much. Have a seat. Alyssa, you work at CENA Hessen. It's the Center for Climate, Environment and Noise Protection Innovation in Aviation. And it's been developed because obviously Frankfurt is the hub of aviation and planes, and there needed to be some work done. The next person on stage, I welcome you, Christine Wang. Yeah, please take a seat here next to me. Christine, you are responsible for the development of the Lufthansa Innovation Hub and its sustainable anchoring in the tech ecosystem. And last but not least, I welcome Lars, Holger, Engelhard on stage. Lars, thank you so much for being here. He is a serial entrepreneur, and he spent more than 15 years in the automotive industry. But right now you have a new challenge, and this is all about boats. You are the CEO and founder of Unleash Future Boats, and we will talk about this shortly, because he is the pioneer, I would say, when it comes to electric boats and what they can have an impact for us in the future. And before we dive into our topic, I quickly wanted to know your thoughts, Lars, on our previous talk. What did come in mind when you heard him talking on the stage as a researcher at the University of Amsterdam?
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to listen to that speaker before, because it resonates very well. We have been sitting and thinking about the future mobility on the water, thinking about exactly the same topic, about how the city is changing, the bicycle movement, and there's one little issue where I live. There's a big water gap in between, and if you want to go and ride by bike around the waterside, you spend like 20-30 minutes, and bridges are very rare. And how can we interconnect that movement of eliminating the cars, as he said before? And we thought about introducing the boating system with the bikes and really fill the gap as a missing link for intermodal transportation. So I think that is very smart thinking about the before and after, eliminating and speaking out loud what we don't want to have, the cars every single time on short rides. So the boats resonates very well, because it is making the whole sense-making environment of network.
Yeah, I also love the thought to think about what we want and not what we have and maybe don't want anymore, but how can we imagine a better future? I think this is all where it starts, in our mind, right? So, Alessia, you are in aviation, in planes, you were talking about planes. I mean, we all know that the pandemic has definitely made us think about, do we need to travel as much as we did? What's the future about it? And we all know that air travel produces millions of metric tons of carbon dioxide each year. So my question is, how can really new technologies help airlines reduce emissions and meet their sustainable goals?
aviation is actually an exciting area where we have large different amounts of different technologies that are out there. I mean, to name a few, I mean, we have technologies that help airlines on an every day-to-day basis. This is the new airplanes that are being developed, and which is great because our trips becoming more efficient, and our per passenger use of the fuel is actually reducing with all the new different modals that are being getting out there. The thing is that when we look at the absolute numbers of the CO2 that is being emitted of the traveling, we see that the number is still rising, so we need other technologies also to support our goals. So we have even more other technologies happening now. One of the exciting bits is the sustainable aviation fuels technologies. This is the development where we're actually putting a lot of energy into right now, because the thing is that airplane will probably exist for the next 30 years. So the airplanes that are going to be traveling in the next 30 years are being built already today. And sustainable aviation fuels technologies allow us to actually implement them into the existing modes. So these are the two different types of technologies. One is based on waste. So we take rest materials like used cooking oil or wood chips and use them as a raw material to produce fluid kerosene. The exciting bit is that we don't drill any new holes to get CO2. We just get the CO2 that is already out of the atmosphere, and we reuse it, repurpose it, and reuse it again. The tricky bit is that you have to be careful not to motivate people to produce more waste once these raw materials get more economic value. The other interesting part of the sustainable aviation fuels are the so-called e-fuels, or power to liquid. This is something that we're working on also here in Hessen. And this is the technology where you take water, you split it with renewable energy, out comes a hydrogen and oxygen, and hydrogen you mix it with CO2, and voila, out comes a synthetic fuel, which can be poured up in every plane right now, and you can buy it on your private trip or if you transport cargo. So it does have an exciting use to it. Of course, we have completely different technologies, like hydrogen planes. This is the thing that is being developed right now. The benefit of hydrogen is that we get it with green hydrogen, we get it from water and renewable energy, and when it burns, it leaves just water. The tricky bit is that hydrogen has 3 times volume of your conventional kerosene, so imagine how all these planes can look like.
Wow.
It's a tricky thing, but the engineers are working right now on it, and we are looking at less carrying capacity, but medium range also. Batteries is also exciting technology, where we have best solution, basically. We don't burn any fuel, we don't leave any particles or any concentration trails. The technology right now is so that we have only short distances and less carrying capacity, but this is a challenge to a community here to get better batteries to it.
I have many questions in my mind, but I just want to quickly pick up the word short distance, because when we are talking about planes and aviation, we are mostly talking about long distances, right? So, Christine, short distances. I mean, you work in the Lufthansa Innovation Hub, and you are also very aware of new technologies and which possibilities might happen in the future. So what's the current trend we can pick on, and how can we maybe move in cities in the next years?
Yeah, I want to take a step back, actually, and I think all of us in the room here, we craved for traveling for 1.5 years. And I actually have to say it's really great to be on stage and being here face to face with you guys. And I think the gist of it, if I were to summarize the crisis, is really we realize everyone loves traveling. It's part of our human nature. So that will be a part that will always be around, no matter in which kind of time or era we actually will be living. So I think that's one really fundamental belief I have. The second one is, obviously, we talk about sustainability today. We talk about how we can actually move in the future and how can we do that more sustainably. And obviously, as you were mentioning before, you were talking about all these great technologies going forward. I think another part to that is obviously what are some of the use cases, and mentioning short term, I mean, what we're looking at obviously right now is air taxis and how this is going to move us in the future. And there are a lot of regulations around it, and we get to the challenges of it at one point in time. But I think that's really exciting. That really excites me. but also connecting that a little bit to the previous speaker. What I really loved was that image of that road and that deer, because I do think that collectively we need to really think from a different angle. And to give an example, I was really excited about this SpaceX launch of like some civilians, and everything was automated. And I think we see that because people are sort of like thinking differently about the current systems, while a lot of us are actually trapped in that system because they cannot think differently. And so I believe we need those, radical visionaries to really change the system and adopt these new technologies.
So when you are talking about radical change, I think it's important to understand how we can also foster this and really try to get outside of our own box, because you're all working every day in the same field, right? So how do you manage to get out of your comfort zone mentally?
To be honest, it's really by connecting with people, right? So we had a dinner yesterday, and it was super inspiring to me just to like see other perspectives. We're all here to kind of talk about that sustainability topic, but from very different angles, very different industries, and that's really what really helps me to break out of the shackles of our sector.
I personally love the idea of air taxis, and we already talked about prior to our panel, and I was really excited because it's like, okay, imagine if I come here to Frankfurt by air taxi, how can that be? Are there even regulations? How about the transport system? Christine, how realistic is it?
Well, there are some tests currently running. So, for example, China's Yihang is a startup that's currently doing some tests with passengers autonomously, which is quite exciting and frightening at the same time. We will probably see in 2023 earliest or 2024 in selected cities, states such as Dubai or Singapore, to see like the first air taxis to be lifted up. But I think there is quite a bit of time that needs to pass for us to really adopt it on a mass market and sort of have this vision of like back to the future, and that's mainly driven by social acceptance or mass acceptance. Like, do we feel or do we trust that technology can actually really get us safely from A to B? But then also, obviously, it depends on the infrastructure, right? Like the physical infrastructure of landing these things, but then also the digital infrastructure to be connected to different other services. And then last but not least, obviously, it's a policy and also a licensing question.
Of course, yeah. I don't know about a license for an air taxi yet, but Lars, you are not in the air, but you're more on the ground. You're in the sea, you're in the water. Is there anything, and I just saw you smiling, you can also pick up from the aviation or air transport in your industry when we're talking about boats?
Yes, a lot. Actually, I get out of comfort zone every single day because I grew up in the automotive industry with autonomous driving. So when we started on the boats, we took the experts, the top experts of the avionics, the automotive, and put there the right people from the maritime. Not too young, not too old, thinking new ways possible, but experienced. And what we did is the Tesla approach, the greenfield approach. We said, think about 2030, about the radical change that we would need in 2030, because things are going to change, and it's happening. And then thinking about 2030, about the urgency of change, we flip back and said, it's back today. And now act and behave like it would be like 2030. So this is what is getting the whole team ahead of time. This is why everyone in the team is radical today, as it must be in 2030. It is radical in production, it's radical in the material we choose, it's radical in the zero emission approach that we take. It's not about reduction at our place, it's about being zero, net zero. And that's for the comfort zone. And for the idea of being net zero and autonomous, we have standards in the avionics, like the DO178B. And then we have the standards in the automotive industry, like the ISO 26262. And they're very equal to each other. When you look at it, it has a huge overlap. Well, the cars don't fly, so it's one dimension less. But we do learn a lot because there's no such standard in the maritime industry. But if you think about the plane, about 3 systems being redundancy and so on, it had an impact on the boats because we do multi-hull. So each hull is independent. So we are a little bit closer to what the avionics is doing. If one system fails, we still have the other one. And this is how we navigated through the whole issue, thinking about 2030. And we learned a lot from the aeronautics, we learned a lot from the automotive industry. And if we look at both industries, the automotive industry learned from avionics, but it has a way shorter certification time. We talked before when we started here, and you said, well, it does still look different between the SpaceX and the cockpit of the airplane. Well, it's the same, because in a car we started from the airplane, but we had the short iteration in innovation, and now we come with the boats, and the same thing is happening again. If we look at the air taxis about Lilium and Volocopter, it took more than 7 years to spot Dubai and Singapore for aviation testing fields. And at Unleash Future Boats, we looked at the issues they had from the very beginning radically. And I'm very proud to announce that we have not just the prototype, we have the first boat that is licensed internationally for 2 passengers with no captain internationally.
01.
01.
Applause, please.
And learning from the aeronautics and the automotive industry, we defined the so-called ODD, the operational design domain, and we went to talk to the same insurance companies and said, well, we have that license for 01 internationally with passengers and no captain. And I'm very much proud to even put that on top. We not just have the license plate for 01, we have the worldwide global insurance. So we are here, we are ready to go, we are ready to scale and introduce a solution to the world that is interconnecting the mobility, that is interconnecting the way we can travel by bikes, that is completely new on how we can transport cargo with zero emission, autonomous, on smaller boats capable to operate in shallow water when there is more drafts, more dry parts during summertime. Still economically. So I'm very happy we are ready to go.
Lars, how many boats do we actually need from your sort? I mean, now we have 1, which is amazing. It's a great start. But how many do we really need to make a difference, let's say in 3 years? Because we all know, like shipping industry, as far as I know, it's 2% of the whole global emissions. It's a lot still. And then we think about all the big tanks. It's not about like little sports boat, probably not the biggest problem. You know it even better. So how many boats are necessary?
A lot, and we cannot do it just by ourselves. If we look at the inland shipping for Europe, it's even worse. We have 3.7% of CO2 emissions in cargo and logistics, transportation, people and goods in Europe, with an annual growth rate that is just tremendous. So there's a huge impact on that. And what we do is we introduce the boat, and we are new on how we produce the boats either. We go like cars. We produce it with the robot welding of aluminum. So we can do that cost effective compared to Eastern Europe in higher standards. We don't need the steel from China, which is not available on the market here in Europe. So we can currently ramp up to 100 boats on the production line we have per year, which are 200 hulls. We can expand that to like 500, and then we can reproduce even in Singapore and Canada. So we estimate that there's a need for hundreds and thousands of boats, but we cannot do it just by ourselves. We will introduce the propulsion system with Green Boats Engineering to third parties. So we want to become a provider of zero-emission propulsion system that is ready to go for everyone out there, every shipyard, that goes from the prop in the water to the charging pod on the plug-in side. So we not just care about the boat as a tool, not just like the Tesla as a car, it's a whole infrastructure. And it's what Christine Wang said before, it's about landing the planes, it's about the harbor. We just recently pre-negotiated the whole complete harbor. Our company is ready to grow, and we will introduce the first zero-emission digital harbor to really experiment with the infrastructure as well. You need the charging pods for everything, so it's a complete solution. We need to think in the ecosystem. We need to think outside the box, like the school with no cars.
And Alessia, I mean, we're talking about big harbors, new concepts, etc. You talked about new possibilities to fuel planes, etc. That actually costs a lot. Who will cover the costs? Is it me?
Well, this is one of the challenges we're actually facing. Costs is a big issue, because we have, on all those solutions, we have large components like renewable energy. And this is one of the prices where it actually covers up quite a big bunch of it. And we need renewable energy for batteries. We need for hydrogen solutions to split the water. We need renewable energy for power to liquid to split the water again. Then we have in our sustainable aviation fuels on a base we have carbon, we have CO2, which is quite expensive as well. It's really funny because it's actually, well, we have too much of CO2, but in our case we need it as a raw material, and it's difficult to get. It's, if you imagine air to be a 1 liter bottle, the CO2 would be just like 8 little droplets in it. So we need to get it out, and there are already companies who do the direct air capture technologies, but we still are in the high prices. A ton of CO2 costs around 600 euros, and this is, you know, compared to a certificate which now costs around 60 euros, you see where the difference comes. So we definitely need more investors who are willing to go and introduce and produce more of those technologies, in our case our sustainable aviation fuels, but also customers who are willing step by step integrate it in their own traveling, but also even cargo.
But that really sounds like a luxury product. I mean, I assume that not many people can afford such an expensive flight, right? I mean, if we calculate, or if we do the math you just suggested, how much would a ride or a flight be from Frankfurt to New York?
You mean using the aviation? Well, in 20 years, well, let me take out my crystal kugel, crystal ball, and see what's going to happen as a destination. Well, in 20 years, we estimate that the sustainable aviation fuels can cost around 5 times what the normal kerosene costs now. So we take your example, what is it, Frankfurt, New York. It's around 6,200 kilometers. We take a good flight, a good model for airplane that takes about 3 liters per 100 kilometers. It will be around, per person, 190 liters. So yeah, with the price of 3,000 euros per SAFs per ton, we will come up for that bit, around 350 euros extra per person per flight one way.
Christine, when you listen to these numbers, I mean, in the beginning you mentioned we all love traveling, and I also relate to that. I mean, I also love being here. I actually came by train, but however, do we need a mindset shift at some point? And do we actually also have to realize that traveling is not a leisure thing, like, let's say 30 years ago, oh, let's go to Saint-Tropez for the weekend trip? Or do we also have to change our thinking?
I mean, yes. I think that's the key question in the room, right? It's, are we all willing to put the money where our mouth is, and to really also pay for, you know, being more sustainable. I do think that there's a generation shift. I think younger people do care more about having a purpose, having an impact. And we also see that, for example, at Lufthansa, we also have the solution Compensate that we've built, technology platform for companies as well as like end consumers or travelers to offset their carbon footprint during the plane or during that particular flight, in order to really have a purpose and an impact. So I do think that it does require a mental shift, obviously.
And in the boat industry?
We absolutely must. I think, to be crystal clear, this planet has an end of life stamp on it right now. If we don't change, if I don't change, if you don't change, we don't talk about economics in 2040, because we're not part of the ball that is going around the emptiness in space. So there must be a change in the shipping industry, because the whole global economics is relying on it. And if we don't take the impact now, if we don't have meaningful relationship face-to-face meetings going for 3,000 money in the future, there will be no meeting in 2040. So I think it's a question that we should ask, but we should be serious about the answer about it. There's no other way around. And in the shipping industry, we are the first ones to really demonstrate it's feasible, it's possible. We have had a lobby guy in the shipyard, and he told me, well, we are not allowed to go by 2026 with anything measured at the tailpipe, at the very exhaust pipe, that is larger than 0.0% of emissions. Lars, how shall we do that? And our CTO is smart and said, well, try to find the exhaust pipe on our boat. It's electric. So we really need to make that step in order to have a planet for ourselves, because 2030, what the IPCC is just corrected, it's not 35, it's 30. We have that tipping points that are collapsing already. It's 9 years ahead of time, and we have September, it's actually 8 years ahead of time. What's your exit excuse in 8 years? So we will have that, and we're on it. And luckily, it's not just us, it's not just the boats, it's the avionics too. So yes, we need to make that step.
Will we also feel it in our wallet? I mean, now we are talking about two-man boats or women boats. Are you also planning to invest time in converting big tanks or like big ships with automotive driving, electronic?
Yes, we will equip the large ships with electronics for efficiency, but our domain is the import, the inland shipping, and the coastal shipping. And this will change a lot, because it's not about the size getting bigger, larger, and optimizing the costs. It's about getting small enough to go in the draft zone. So it's about the world in 2030, and it's not looking like we get bigger boats, it's getting tougher boats to cope with the environment that is ahead of us, with stormy weather on oceans, with shallow water in inland transportation. It's not about the pricing of zero emission, which is higher. Geez, it's about the costs of what just happened in North Rhine-Westphalia with the flooding. It's all those external costs. And if we are serious about the external cost of anything that we do in business today, it is a lot higher than the extra on being sustainable. So we will feel it in a way when we change the perspective, as we had in the first lecture here before. If we change the perspective, sustainability is cheaper. Of course, we will pay more, but it's nothing compared to what we have to face with the external cost. Think about the World Overshoot Day. It's not about the emptiness of resources. Shit, it's about getting the money in the future. Because we're putting everything on the bill of tomorrow and tomorrow of tomorrow. So if we think about the cost, sustainability, yes, has a higher price tag on it. But it's nothing compared to the cost to rebuild the cities here. And this is not something that is just challenging us every 100 years. No. Listen to the scientists. This is going to happen more often. So please, if we talk about the cost, think about what we do today, including the external cost of repairing what we just screwed up. And then think about the higher price of sustainability, and you will see this is the true cost of today, including of what we have to pay tomorrow. And then it's a sustainable cost, which is a lot less. Thank you. I know it's not a pleasant thinking, but it's the thinking we must do. And it's a thinking we must do today, because 2030 is 8 years. What's your excuse?
I think this is also a big challenge for education, or also educating younger people. I mean, you actually said that the younger generation is more aware, and I can also relate to that. I mean, I'm 30, but I know that my sister, for instance, she's 20, she's already even more aware. And she's always telling me, hey, Laura, did you think about this, or think about this? So, I mean, you work in a totally different area. You don't work in education, but how does education play a role? How can you educate your surrounding on behavioral change or mindset change in the aviation field?
Well, I think I cite Lars. It's really just about this, seeing this perspective and seeing the, what are our environments. And IPCC report, you just, you talk about it, you speak about it. You were given a certain budget of CO2, which we have to take into consideration. And on an everyday basis, whatever we're working, say innovation, we can recalculate how much CO2 do we have in the next couple of years. And then based on that, we actually start on our different companies needs, to implement the change. Because this is the next couple of years, the next 5 years, this is when we're going to get perspective. We need a clear path, we need a clear plan of CO2 fossil exit for the next couple of years, and we need more investment, and we need more stringent governance for those areas like sustainable aviation fuels or in the boating industry. We need to kind of come from knowing and educating ourselves about it to restructuring and actually implementing it on the different dimensions. Absolutely.
And I think for me, piggybacking on what you just said about the total cost of it, I think really the way we have to tackle it is by collaborating. Right? We talked about the ecosystem, we talked about the different elements that actually will help us to adapt to these new technologies. But I do think that, we need to have this ecosystem view on it to really think about the travel chain or the cargo chain or the supply chain and really work with different partners together to actually tackle it. And including as well as obviously the traveler per se or the cargo company to really help this mission to really, become more sustainable and net zero, carbon net zero.
And I think we need to include the students. Monday I spent talking to the Plus STEM initiative. It's about the talents that need to be educated and mentored and challenged. We as a young company now in the growth, we are collaborating with the students, with the smart-minded people to really challenge them in 2030 and take them in projects along with our efforts. And we regard and respect them as partners. We need to educate them in a way that they not just simply change their perspective in behavior, but they need to be part of the solution. They need to become the innovators of tomorrow, and we need to include them, not just for the mind shift, but for giving them the right tools in addition to the mindset. We have Fridays for Futures. What is going to happen? Either they become political or radical with Extinction Rebellion. I think there's a third choice, motivation. And we need to pick them up right there, to motivate them and educate them along with us. With the initiatives that you have, take them as a team member and include them. And it works splendid.
Thank you so much. I think that was the perfect last sentence. It's all about motivation, changing our mindset and behavior as well. And also let's face that if we continue the way it is, then it will probably remain the same or become even worse. So thank you so much for being with me spending the past 35 minutes with me, and hopefully I wish you all the best for your project. I really will follow your journey and either see you soon on an air taxi or electric boat or some very innovative plane ride to New York. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Laura. Thanks a lot to the panelists. We continue in the mobility game. And our next topic, it's my pleasure to introduce Eckart Diepenhorst. Eckart, he's the Chief People and Communications Officer. Eckart, I was tempted to say that you're the Chief Happiness Officer, which is not true, but I can tell you're a happy person. You're going to tell us about how shared mobility is going to impact our cities, I guess now, and probably also in the future. So, warm welcome. Good to have you here on stage. Stage is all yours.
Thanks very much. I'm not that happy at the moment. I'm actually, matter of fact, sweating like an idiot. Because after the speech from Marco, I had to basically rewrite my entire speech because I used the wrong words. The other reason is, as you can see on the slide, we thought that we had 25 minutes. I have 15 minutes, so I need to really rush it. That's why I'm in totality going to be a bit clumsy on my slides. I hope you don't mind and you can bear with me and then help me through this. That's very kind of you, nodding. Thanks. I'm not going to introduce myself other than I still wanted to share the picture because it shows me before COVID, before I put 6 kilograms on my hips. And it shows me with a beard that is not having a permanent wave from FFP2 masks. What I do want to introduce quickly is the company that I stand for, that I represent today. We used to be what you might know as My Taxi or as Halo or as Clever Taxi in Romania or B Taxi in Greece or Chauffeur Privé in Paris. And we've brought all of this together, remodeled the entire business to now be a business that is probably a little bit bigger than people might think, or a little bit, has a bit more responsibility. And it's probably also part of the problem to a great extent. That's why we now need to take this very serious, and I need to speak about these topics. The way we move is changing, and I'm going to try and balance Marco's speech with my speech now, because I'm going to try and give it a bit of an angle of what do customers actually want. At the end, I'm also going to share a QR code where you can download a study that we've done, because we need to obviously understand our customers. Because I think we need to balance our approach of wanting to change the world with what the customer wants, and hopefully we can influence the customer and our offerings so that that is going to come together. So we know that customers do want more choice, and it doesn't say, to pick up from what Marco said, we do know that that this is not efficiency, this is more choice. And we've done a study that safety is now almost 52% of all our commuters are saying that safety is actually most important to them, before ease and before speed of commuting. So that is, Corona has changed what we're doing, but you can still see that when they're talking about ease of commuting and speed of commuting, that this is still very much related to what Marco was talking about. So it's still related to efficiency in some shape or way or form. So we will need to address that somehow. What is interesting is that we also see that there's a very strong push for being more flexible in the demand. And I find that interesting, because that is actually giving us the opportunity to start improving and start changing the offering and go for that more playful approach that Marco was talking about, rather than the efficient approach. I'm saying that, and if I look at myself, is there are days where I really want to go home as quickly as I can, and I care less about the mode of transportation because I want to play with my kids for 10 minutes longer. And then there are other days where I do want to enjoy the weather, and I do want to be on a scooter, or I do want to travel in a different way. And by the way, this is not mutually exclusive either. So what this means for our cities and how we're shaping cities, and how we can influence customers, and how our offering needs to be influenced, is that all parties involved need to find the best possible mobility experience for the user. This is a big task, and it's not easy to work together, because, for example, if we talk about how municipalities and we are working together, municipalities really want us to share data. And we're talking a lot about data, because data can change the way we influence how traffic flows are going, not necessarily in a more efficient way, in different ways. But obviously, we spend a lot of effort into creating that data. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. So then there's that other trend that we all know about, that on-demand is changing the way we're living and the way we're consuming. Now we want our dinner to be there in 30 minutes. We want a car to be there in 2 minutes. We want our tomatoes to be with us in 8 minutes. We don't want to go anywhere. We want an e-scooter to be around the corner, and we want to have a movie whenever we're looking at this. And this is changing the requirements that we will put on our cities, because everything or most of what it says on there is actually having an impact on the infrastructure and on mobility that is running in our cities. So we therefore see a few megatrends, and they are giving us trust in the future, and that giving us hope that we can actually have a very positive impact on what we're doing. So from possession to usage has been a mantra that we've been talking about as shared economy, shared mobility, and so on for, 10 years. But we start seeing a change in consumer behavior. If I talk about myself, I was living in the city center of Hamburg. I didn't have a car. I'm having an electric cargo bike, and I was basically doing everything that I could with that bike, and when I needed a car, I then went for shared mobility. Or, if I didn't have the bike because my wife had it, I then went for a sharing bike. And that is changing, and we also heard that just a minute ago. I think I don't know whether it was small sister or niece, but basically more and more people are not even going for a driver's license, and more younger generations are a lot more alert and a lot more aware of the challenges that we're having on sustainability, which is the second megatrend. So, which is what is creating hope in me, is that when I would have stood here as CEO of my taxi 4 years ago, I would not have spoken about sustainability. I wouldn't have been invited to this event, because it was not something that was easily combinable with the business that we were doing. Now it's the other way around. Now I see this as one of my primary tasks, that I need to rebuild this business so that it can be a more future-proof business operation. So that is giving me some hope. I was already talking about the precious data for municipalities, and that is a big, big, big thing where we work very closely with governments, with municipalities, and we will have to discuss that for many weeks and months and years, because of course there's a greater good that can be dealt with data, and we need to be careful to not go into that, what Marco said, into that efficiency game. But if I can, for example, get mobility data from other mobility providers, I am going to be better in predicting traffic jams, so I can guide consumers in a different way through my app to avoid that traffic jam. Maybe it's not the shortest route anymore, but maybe it's a more playful route, but it's even going to be the faster route on top. If I combine, and that is something that we're working on together with the German government at the moment, is if I combine weather information with mobility information, I will be able to offer you a more playful way to get to work, because I know what the weather is going to be, and I can offer you different mobility options rather than maybe just another car on the road. And if we think about that, that level of flexibility is actually also going to be a time saver. So I'm not avoiding efficiency in totality, but when I want to go home to my kids as quickly as possible, I've had it that I took the Free Now app. I was doing a bit commercial there. So I took an app and I was going into a taxi. I went into a traffic jam, I left the taxi, I went on an e-scooter, I bypassed the traffic jam, I got into another car. I was home probably 20 minutes earlier to play with my kids in a more playful way, and probably at the end of the day even in a more sustainable way as well. So, sustainable mobility rethinks the system. It's a bit funny that on a congress like this I'm going, did you know that? I mean, who doesn't know that in the room? But obviously transportation is a big part of the problem, where this is how I started. The business that I stand for is part of the problem, but I hopefully can also share with you that it's also part of the solution. 4 proofs that sustainability mobility is impacting our lives, and this is from various studies, and like one of them, like I said earlier, I'm going to share with you at the end. So 90% of experts believe micromobility will be exceeding pre-crisis levels, which is a very positive prediction, because as you can imagine, mobility, COVID came, 95% of mobility actually went down. So we had a 95% breakdown in our revenues, in our business model, if you like. This is coming back, but it's coming back in a different way. Business travel is picking up a lot slower. I mean, you all know on how many events like this you've been in the last 2 years. And other ways of mobility is actually picking up. 40% of business travelers would like to use bikes or e-bikes to commute daily, and 37% to go to meetings. So what we're seeing is there's hope. People are starting to change the way they want to commute, and they want to be mobile on the road. Own cars and company cars are less and less relevant to people. So what it says, 45% of employees who currently offer company cars to their employees say they would replace them with mobility budget. I'm going to talk a little bit about mobility budget in a minute as well. This is very, very promising. When we speak to our corporate accounts and our customers, in the past we were obviously competing to company cars, and maybe we would grab some business if people would go to the airport because they didn't want to take the company cars. But what this says is that big employers in Europe are starting to consider, instead of giving a car to an employee, giving the same amount of money to the employee. And mobility is starting to become a benefit for the employees rather than something, I don't know what a company car was. I haven't had one. Obviously, I'm not having one in where I work, right? So, like I said, very, very promising, because we see that there's a push from corporates to accommodate the desire from the employees. 46% of companies say sustainability is one of the 3 greatest pain points when they're concerning their ground transportation programs. Very, very promising. This is us asking our customers. This is nothing that we've done as a study for PR purposes or whatever. So this means that why we are here is becoming a bit of a mass phenomenon, and there's going to be business to be made, which is a good news, not just for me as the business, but actually for us as a society. So what are the top 3 appeals for mobility budget? 64% are actually going for it because of the sustainability in the mobility budget. It's not a company car, it's different modes of transportation in different ways, more electric. I'm going to show you in a minute. The employee satisfaction and well-being and the cost reduction. The cost reduction is actually important. There's so many cars in car parks of companies that are not even allocated to employees because of churn in employees, and COVID, if anything, made sure that there's more attrition and more churn. Employees are starting to look for new jobs much quicker than they used to do. So there's a lot of wasted resource in the whole company car ownership that we can attack if we sell mobility instead of we sell a car. What do I mean by mobility budget? It's basically employers have the opportunity to allocate amounts to their employees that goes on an app. Happens to be our app, in case I haven't said that yet. And the employees can then pick whatever option they want to, whatever mobility option that we have on our app. And that is, as I showed when I introduced the business, going to be more and more mobility options. And this is interesting because this is starting to become a more future-proof way of looking at mobility as well, because we have a platform. Other businesses have a platform as well, but we have a platform, and these platforms are open. So if I refer to the panel that we've just listened to, is if there are flying taxis, we can put flying taxis. If there are better ways of traveling by boat, then we can just plug that into this kind of offering to the employees of our businesses. So therefore, it's increasing flexibility, satisfaction, well-being, sustainability, and so on. It's amazing. You gotta have this. And we do this in a more clean way. I'm not going to read out what it says on the slide, but we're trying to stick to what I'm preaching here by being more sustainable towards our drivers, supporting the municipalities to actually improve infrastructure. We have incentive programs for drivers as well to swap into electric cars, and we're working very closely with mobilities. We do promote it. It's breaking my heart. When I ordered my taxi in Offenbach this morning, I wasn't able to offer an electric vehicle, which means in Offenbach, clearly we are not done with the job yet. But when in Hamburg, for example, I'm trying to promote for electric vehicles if customers are working for it. And obviously we do carbon offsetting as well. So I conclude, one of the 2 reasons why I was sweating so hard is tick in a box, is I didn't overrun. I still have 2 minutes. I can now start talking about my personal life and so on. But I conclude that mobility can help shaping for smarter cities. And I conclude that if we get our job really wrong, then we will just put another 200,000 cars on the road. But we have a lot of options for us, businesses like us, to actually get our job right, build features, build products in a different way so that we can accommodate the journey towards more sustainability and towards more playful mobility. So that, I'm also referring to what Marco said. Feel free to download the report that we've created. I'm going to just leave that on the slide for a minute longer if you want to take a scan of the QR code, because the next slide only says thank you. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Eckart. We have to tick another box. Are you happy now?
Yes, now I'm much more happy.
Okay, so check. Thanks a lot for your presentation.
Thanks very much.
Very well done.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going back to back with our next expert panel. It's my pleasure to hand over to our panel moderator, Tanja Kufner. She's the head of ventures and startups at Nemetschek Group. Tanja, you have been with us on stage yesterday, so you're familiar with the stage. You're coming here with full swing. Warm welcome. I'm almost ready to hand over to you. You're going to talk about urban futures, building cities for people, not cars. Super interesting. I mean, we heard it before from Eckart. An industry, part of the problem, hopefully part of the solution then as well. How are cities going to look like? So the stage is all yours. Very excited. Thank you very much.
Very excited to be here. It's the last panel on the topic of mobility. So I am very excited to be here. And we're hosting three wonderful people. Constantin actually just arrived in the very last minute. So please help me welcome three wonderful panelists on stage. First, I would like to welcome Tran. She's the head of sustainability or sustainable mobility at the ICLAI, and she's going to explain to us what the ICLAI is. Welcome. Please have a seat. Next on stage, please help me welcome Marc Augusto. Marc Augusto is a researcher at the DAI Lab, the Distributed AI Lab for the Technical University in Berlin. Welcome. Please have a seat. And last but not least, Constantin Schwaab, the CEO of Wirelane. Welcome. Pleasure. Hey, so good to see you guys. So in order to start, I would love to hear from all three of you what each of you do. And I'd love to start with ladies first. Tumi, can you explain to me what the ICLAI Institute is and what it does?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. And ICLAI stands for Local Governments for Sustainability. And we are a city network of 2,500 cities, and we are active in more than 100 countries. I am the global coordinator of different offices as well. And I'm responsible for sustainable mobility. And essentially, we advocate for livable cities, and we support our cities and work with them to promote better mobility and better built environment. And we connect all this narrative to climate change and environmental components.
Great, you have over 10 years experience in this sector, so this will be enlightening. Marc, please tell us about you guys.
Great, thanks, I'm glad to be here. So we are running a research project in the heart of Berlin, which is a showcase project on AI in mobility, focusing on autonomous driving. This research project is actually a consortium of many companies, many authorities which are involved in this. And our focus is to show to citizens, to politics, industry, what AI and mobility actually means. And by that, we are building some vehicles, building up them, digitalizing them. We're building some software which should demonstrate some autonomous driving functionality. And we are digitalizing infrastructure, which is the street from Brandenburg Gate to Siegessäule and further on to Kurfürstendamm, which is right in the heart of Berlin. And we're actually inviting all of you to jump on our vehicles next year. So you can actually enter our bus and try to understand why specific decisions are taken, how this actually works. And by that, we want to promote what it actually means to use AI in mobility. And that's it for now, I'd say.
Fantastic. So that leaves you, Constantin. Let's talk about Wirelane.
Thank you, Tanja. So at Wirelane, we're in the e-mobility space. In very simple words, I bought my first electric vehicle 9 years ago. It was a Tesla Model S, the only available model in the market. So I took the vehicle to the German Autobahn. It was fantastic, rode it for about 200 kilometers, and then I had to charge the vehicle, and it sucked. It was a really bad experience, and ever since I've been trying to improve that experience for our users. So what we do at Wirelane is we build charging infrastructure. We build charging infrastructure consisting of the hardware, consisting of credit card terminals, consisting of a software layer all the way down to the controller. And the business model innovation is that we built a platform to trade greenhouse gas emission certificates, which is the foundation for the transportation revolution, going away from combustion engine vehicles to e-mobility. And our vision is to have 100% renewable energies. I've been producing renewable energies for the last 13 years, and the vision also includes 100% emission-free transport. And I'm convinced that we will get there by the end of this decade.
For those of you who don't know, I have to congratulate you. You just recently closed a Series B funding round of, was it 18 million?
Yes.
So massive congrats. Always happy when finally infrastructure and German mobility companies get funding. Also, fun fact, in case you don't know, this is your third startup. You've gone from energy to the movies. Oh, geez. And then back to energy, and it's his fourth startup. So anyway, super, super exciting. Yeah. I would love to understand what your mission is. You just explained it. And your thesis is that we can achieve these goals and we can go energy infrastructure, clean and ready. But how about autonomous vehicles? Like, how do you think we sit? And what is your mission and purpose with this particular lab? And what are you trying to teach the users in the mobility community in Germany?
Yeah, it's a question to me,
yes,
right?
It's a question to you.
So, super. So basically what we want to do in this project is, so first of all, we need to set the foundation. So we need things to demonstrate, right? So we have digitalized infrastructure, we have a vehicle fleet, and of course, as you know, there are different types of vehicles. We have the car, which we use mainly, of course, for individual purposes. We have transporter for logistic cases. And we do have public transport, which would be the bus, which is around the building here and is bringing us back to the train station, for instance. So what we want to do here is we actually want to go through the whole process. We digitalize the vehicles. That means that we put sensors, so components, computing units in the vehicles. We build a software stack which allows us to drive the vehicles on our test track in Berlin. And then we will have several events which will be going on alongside the project. And within these events, we invite people to enter these vehicles, to sit down, and then first to actually see what's the process, how does autonomous driving actually works. And we want to take away fears which comes with this new technology. So basically, if you sit down and then you see what the bus actually perceives in the environment, then you can also see that the infrastructure is intelligent because it has been digitalized. So the infrastructure already tells the bus before it arrives at an intersection that there might be a bicycle on the road. So it drives slowly. And these are things we want to demonstrate. So our approach is one which is called distributed intelligence, meaning we have vehicles digitalized, they communicate with each other. We have the digitalized infrastructure, which has computing units installed, and we have the cloud, which is for analyzing the data, for giving some predictions and so forth. And by combining these three instances, we create some intelligent system which allows us to have some autonomous driving functionalities in very complex road infrastructures. Of course, it would be different in rural environments.
So we're doing this because your hypothesis is that in America, people are a lot more open to autonomous driving technology. It's been around for, Waymo's been on the streets forever, and I mean, the US has been so far advanced, and we're not really seeing a lot of, cars driving around in Germany yet. And even the infrastructure, the A9 and between Munich and Nuremberg, which is supposed to be the digital infrastructure sort of highway, we're not seeing that much yet either. Is that part of the reason why we're doing this?
Yeah, so basically what we can see in Germany is that there are already a lot of funding or funded projects around from many different types, of course, for highway, exploring how it works on the highway. Our focus is definitely to promote what it would mean in that way and to take away fear and to drive social acceptance by, of course, showcasing that the data which we perceive in the infrastructure by our vehicles and also the infrastructure sensors, that these data is not kind of stored in our cloud, it's processed right in the place, and then we use it. We use the information to have a safer transport from A to B. So this is definitely a focus we have to have a better understanding of what autonomous mobility would mean to us.
Okay, so Constantin and I had a chat earlier, and you have this radical, wonderful vision that you believe that cars that are non-electric have absolutely no business in cities.
Well, I would even go one step further. I think we're at the crossroads as society, as humanity. And first of all, mobility is a means to an end, right? It's getting from A to B. So the whole concept of the car is broken anyways. I mean, I just read this quote by Eric Schmidt. I found it highly interesting. Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, said, it's a bug that the car was invented before the computer, right? I mean, it's a total bug. If you look at it, the way car is designed, it's just flabbergastingly stupid. And it's a very big thing on four wheels that basically takes one person, and it is often the case, unfortunately, one person from one place to another. So I think, first of all, the goal should be to eliminate cars from any major city altogether. That is my personal goal. So my personal goal is that we as a company become superfluous, that infrastructure for electric vehicles becomes superfluous. I just ordered my Sono, which is a fantastic concept. It's a solar-powered car. It's covered entirely with solar cells. Doesn't need any infrastructure. So if you ask me personally, the only kind of infrastructure we would need is very basic infrastructure for public transport, and that's it. However, as an entrepreneur, I think it might take a little longer, so there's an opportunity window for me to make money. But personally, I think we really ought to get rid of cars entirely from urban centers. That's my personal opinion.
Which is fantastic. So that will take a while. And let's hear, is there anybody here in the panel that would completely disagree? Can we live in a city that has absolutely no more cars?
Well,
are we talking about combustion engine? Or?
Can I just say one thing? How can we live in cities that do have cars? That's the question.
Love it.
I mean, that is crazy. That's insane, right? So we live in cities where there's like toxic fuses, gases, and all that around us. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. So how do we build cities? What I want to understand is, can you help me navigate infrastructure planning or cities in 5 or 10 years and in 20 years? Because if we now are using the electrification of cars as a means to an end, as Zwischentechnologie, you know, we're using this because later we've got autonomous cars, and maybe at some point we have no more cars, or we have pods that give us, you know, intermodal mobility. But doesn't that require a completely different city infrastructure planning? So we're building something radically now, spending a ton of money, to then go to the next technology. So are we going from electric to other, you know, other fuel cells, to other, you know, other fuel technologies? How does this process look like from a city planning and urban perspective?
So I think that there is a bit of reframing to be done, because the title of this session is about mobility for people and not for cars. So perhaps I think that we work a bit in silos, and so in my case I work a lot with policies, but then when I attend these events where there are a lot more startups or researchers in technology, then innovation is only about technology and shift of technology. I think that things are also shifting in the sense that it's great that there is this vision of cities that or how to create cities that don't rely on cars. But perhaps the question is really, how do we reach the balance? In the sense that why don't we see a car as an option, and it can be a shared car, or if we really need to have a private car, then how do we make it one option out of many, so that essentially urban space becomes a bit more accessible to all and also more equitable. And one of the options is really to have this connection between the private sector and public sector, and to identify how can we integrate the different options that are available. And another one, it's great that we hear about the charging station, because that's one of the challenges that the cities have, not only for their car fleets when they shift to electric, but also when they think about electric buses, for instance. They have been like piloting, but essentially scaling up is an issue, because then you have to check the electric grid, what it means, what type of charging stations are available. And then on the other end of the spectrum, how do you make all this more safe? And then essentially then is autonomous technologies then a disruption, or is something that could help with creating more benefit to cities? So essentially, from the city perspective, is I feel that when I hear from cities and the fact that a lot of innovators are disrupting the way the city works, essentially it's a matter of perhaps echoing Marco on communication to a certain extent. How do we see the city, but also how do we exchange with each other, and how do we understand each other's needs, so that there is this integrated planning for real. And one experiment that started 10 years ago in ICLEI was really to take one neighborhood and make it complete. Nowadays it's called the 15-minute city, it can be called complete city. We called it eco-mobile city, and we tried also in the global south. And I have to say, it wasn't perfect, but take one small community and essentially change the way they move, change their logistics as well, because we have been speaking a lot about the passenger transport, but then logistics has been on the rise. And essentially, how all this interacts, and how do we make sure that this works for the majority, or that there is a common goal, and perhaps you can change minds and also change behavior. And one of the festivals that we organized in 2013, they were used as a benchmark for other Korean cities. This was in Korea, and other Korean cities then have mirrored that experience, and that is a way to trigger a change of conversation, but with some innovation, but also a way to have buy-in from the community, because then the community itself was like championing this activity and a shift of perspective. I have to say, we didn't change Korea, because in Korea there is a car-centric culture, but at the same time there were like some small improvement.
I mean, would you agree? I think the mindset is there. I mean, you look at all around the planet, you look at so many great cities in Europe that are going radical. Barcelona's done it, the Champs-Élysées is going to be one big garden. I mean, the mindset is there, but where does it start? Like, do we need to forbid cars? Does it need to come from politicians that say we are taking cars away from the cities? And it's happening in Munich. Or many other cities. It's making it really difficult for individual car owners to go into cities. It's been working in London forever. What are your recipes?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I had a debate on exactly this topic with Hildegard Müller, the president of the VDA, which is the biggest German lobby organization for the automotive industry, and that was last Sunday in the context of the IAA, the automotive show, on the Marienplatz in Munich, the Central Square. And I mean, she said what she had to say, right? That she thinks that it's not the right way to go to tell people what to do. However, I'm not allowed to fly a helicopter either in town. So this whole argument is just ridiculous. You know what I mean? The regulatory bodies, policymakers are there to make laws that, in the last consequence, creates an environment, a society that the majority of people want. And my argument here is that we have lobby organizations that try to defend positions that are at best reflecting the present, definitely not reflecting the future because of very strong lobby interest, and most likely reflecting the past. So what we're talking about here is that I'm very convinced, and we will see that at the occasion of the next elections, I'm very convinced that the society as a whole is much more advanced than current policymakers. And there's a scientist, Overton, you might have heard about him, the Overton window. Yeah? It's about progressive and conservative societies, and most likely a society is somewhere in the middle. It's never radically progressive and not very conservative either. But the point is that where we stand at the moment, we need much more progressive ideas to solve humanity's problems. And people, my feeling is people are ready. We will see, but people are ready for this, and policymakers are being held back because of very strong lobby interest. And that is just deadly wrong. And in the end, it's going to come back to them, and it's going to ruin the business they're standing for at the moment. So I have very strong doubts that this way of dealing with policies is the right.
What would you wish for?
Car-free cities again. So a combustion engine ban immediately in all major cities in the world. I mean, honestly, this is, I'm going back to this point, how can we tolerate the way cities are being managed at the moment? And as you just said, I mean, it's nice to have incentives and best case studies and benchmarks and all that, but then you say changes go only very slowly because it's a car-centric nation. That's why we need policymakers to put bans, radical bans on certain technologies. I mean, we've done it with tobacco, you know, nobody smokes anymore. So, I mean, we do this all the time as society. I just find it so ridiculous that when it comes to combustion engine vehicles or any kind of combustion technology, that we make this big fuss about it. Well, why do we do this? Because we're massively influenced by the media, massively influenced by lobby organizations, and we should just free our minds from that and look at it what it is. It's a big freaking mess. Going to any major city, it's a big mess. It's a place you don't want to live in.
So yesterday I did a panel where everybody agreed, and it got really boring. So let me see if we all agree on this topic. What do you guys think?
So,
would you agree that we need to immediately ban combustion engine cars from the streets? That one is, do we want to try? Do we think this is great? And then point number two is, do we have even a chance? Like, what are the consequences? Do you think this is going to work? Because if both of you kind of agree, then I have to play the devil's advocate, which I really don't, because I love your idea. But let's see where we go with this.
So yeah, if I may start. So basically, from my point of view, it's crystal clear that we have 48 million registered cars on the road in Germany, which is excluding trucks. So actually, it's a huge amount of vehicles which are registered, which are actually just standing around, because as we know, the vehicles are just used for, on average, maybe an hour a day. So basically, it's just polluting. And of course, we can look at our cities, which is, I agree on that. It's different if we talk about urban environments or rural environments, because it's a very different infrastructure in place and a very different public transport offerings in place as well. So basically, and I think every one of us can reflect on that, if we get out of our house, if we live in a city, then we have a lot of vehicles standing around, and they are just taking away the attractiveness of the neighborhood, for instance. They are also kind of not really promoting mobility in this sense, because they are not accessible to everyone. So from that point of view, if we aim at a mobility landscape which offers us accessibility, which offers us affordability, so mobility should be also something which everyone should be able to get it, right? To get from A to B if you like to do so. So looking at the different dimensions, so what to me mentioned, so from a policy perspective, then looking from the technological perspective, so autonomous mobility will not help us solve these issues, right? It's just a piece of it. So we need policies in place, we need the technology which should help us, for instance, to get use cases done such as vehicle on demand. So basically, I want to get from A to B, and then a vehicle should come to my place, pick me up, bring me to the destination, and drive forward. Not like a car-sharing vehicle, just you know, I need to pick it up, and then I can get from A to B. I need to find a parking lot. So this is something we should aim for. So it's not that easy to say we just get away from all vehicles from now to then, right? But I believe this is difficult because of the transition we need to go. But we need to hurry a bit, right? So it's not like that we can say we wait 20 more years, and this is not the way how we can go. So I agree that we need to take actions here. So we need to find policies which helps us promoting rearranging our public space, because the car-centric city takes away, or let's put it in a different way, it actually promotes the use of the automobile. So this is something we need to change. So we need more space for cyclists, we need more space for pedestrians, and we need less space or fewer space for our vehicles. So because, of course, this promotes the use of a vehicle if it's convenient to get from A to B with a car. And also, that's also an interesting number. Most of the travels we do with an automobile is around 1 kilometer or something. So it's kind of the way from home to the bakery. And this is not how it should be in urban environments. So that's my point.
I mean, we love to bash, though, but I live in Berlin, and I love the fact that we have added, 27 kilometers of new bike paths during Corona, and they're not pop-up, they're permanent. So, I mean, we're slowly getting there. We're not doing it nearly fast enough, no doubt about it. But the solution can't be that we take these 48 million combustion cars and turn them into 48 million electric vehicles, right? That's not an answer. No. So, how radical do you think we need to be? I think that in the next Legislaturperiode, I don't know the word in English, I'm so sorry, that we're going to have radical change. I hope they'll be gutsy enough to do maybe tempo limit 30 in all streets, and maybe make it very uncomfortable for people to use their cars. What are your hopes for the next government?
Well, if I can pick up the vision of removing all the cars today, for instance, it's really not only about the car itself, it's really what people want, because we live in a democracy at the moment. So there would be a huge backlash. And so I think that there are some trends in different cities that are happening, and they are yielding good results. For instance, the low emission zones. That is a very good start. And for instance, in Stockholm, instead of imposing it from the municipality perspective, they did a 1 month or 6 months experiment, and then they had a referendum to see if people have experienced benefits from it. And essentially, the majority decided to continue with the low emission zones. And that has inspired many more cities to do it. And Barcelona has announced during the COVID that essentially they announced the largest low emission zone in the south of Europe. And that it's a very good trend, because essentially instead of banning something, it's incentivizing people to shift. Because it's true that they are saying only vehicles that produce a low emission then can enter, but then that has triggered changes, because essentially some residents have decided not to sell their cars and not to get a new car, for instance, or to shift to, and that combined with integrated planning with, for instance, the super blocks, then that really helped to create open spaces and combined with the public transport, it has allowed the residents to have more options. That at the end of the day, people want to move. How they move, it's important, but then if you give them enough options, then maybe it's less. Also because not everyone moves from A to B. Many gender studies says that women move from A, B, C, D, A, and then eventually they get to Z. So in the end of the day, perhaps we have to think of radical change, but in our reality to a certain extent, because otherwise there will be a lot of, the community needs to be on board, and politicians needs to also be able to be elected to a certain extent.
I get that, but we're running out of time. I mean, we heard so many great other panelists, and I would totally agree with you, but we just don't have the time. If I see how bureaucratic we are and how long things take, I'm afraid we need to go a little bit more radical than we're used to. If you had a magic wand, because we only have 45 seconds, what would you want?
This, I mean, as far as I know, I lived in Barcelona for 4.5 years. It's also a democracy, right? So Barcelona and the radical change they implemented there. Yeah? I just went to Friedrichstraße in Berlin the other day.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I mean, people are so ready to accept this. So what I'm saying is that...
But all their stores went pleite. There's hardly any shops left.
all of them. They were all closed. They're big signs. Foreclosure, exactly. No, but this is radically change is possible. I'm just saying we have to be much bolder. We have to be more courageous, and that's what's lacking. It's not the acceptance of the citizens. That's my point.
I think we're running out of time. Unless you guys would like a closing argument, I think this was fascinating. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Tanja.
For this panel.
Thank you.
It was great. I think, it's time for us to leave the stage. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the debate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oops, something just fell.
Thanks, everyone, for the great panel. Thank you very much, Tanja. Well done. So now it's my great pleasure to welcome Mara Steinbrenner and Linda Köpper from the Impact Festival team. We called it the Midday Greetings. So warm welcome. Please come on stage, and this is your applause.
I hope you're enjoying the Impact Festival as much as we do. We are really happy about the last 1.5 days, and we've experienced a lot. We've had over 68 speakers so far here on stage, covering a multitude of different topics, of different ideas. We had the chance to experience over 178 of the most innovative and sustainable technologies from across all over Europe, exhibited here in these halls and as well online on our platform. We've connected more than 1,500 people online and on site through our pre-events, through our partner networks, and of course through our online community that we are building up at the moment. Some have known each other before, some just met and made new connections yesterday and today. One speaker just came up to me yesterday and told me it's kind of feels like a school class reunion. And I guess we're just all really happy to be here in an actual on-site event to make real connections. Moreover, we had over 48 online lectures and 38 masterclasses. I have to read it. And they discussed and we're working on the problems and challenges that we are facing today. And with all of that and through that, we are creating valuable connections and partnerships between actors. And with all of you, we are bringing together diverse perspectives by listening to politicians, to environmentalists, innovators, business professionals and professors. We are working on problems, but we're also trying to find possible solutions with you. And if I'm kind of looking back into the planning phase, the last 1.5 years leading up to this event, we've already created a multitude of channels. For example, we have our podcast online on our website, we have a magazine, we have had several pre-events with our partner network and a community that we are building up now, leading up now to the Impact Festival that we are all at right now. And what you will see very often, kind of as a repeating narrative, are our core values, which are sustainability, drive, building up a community and building up a connection. And for us, these are not just buzzwords, but these are the core values that we want to live.
Yeah, and like Linda just said, we want to bring these core values to life and turn them into achievable and concrete actions. You may have seen the SDG area right behind the main stage here, and you may have stumbled across SDG number 17, Partnership for the Goals, or to say it in other words, to involve everyone in the world's to-do list. So why are we here today? Sure, the program is awesome and we have inspiring speakers here. We have exhibitors showing the most innovative and sustainable technologies that are on the market at the moment. We have a beautiful venue, and let's be real, after 1.5 years of COVID lockdown, we all need to have a live event. But that's not why we're here today. We are here because our planet is under stress and we need to act now. We need to accelerate the green transformation and change the way we're living, working, doing things, and solving problems, and need to involve everyone in it. The Impact Festival is not just an entity that starts and ends. We're not over and out at 7 p.m. this evening. But together with you, we're shaping, developing, and evolving to find solutions for tomorrow's challenges and involve everyone in the world's to-do list. We brought you here together to connect, collaborate, and create impact together. Together, we can do this and involve everyone in the process. Together, we can accelerate the green transformation and become the biggest community and platform for sustainable innovation and technology. So please, use the remaining hours, get in contact with other people, expand your network, and most importantly, enjoy the event. Thank you so much for being here and making this event so successful. And thanks to our team for making this all possible. Without you, it would have not taken place. So thanks and enjoy.
Thank you.
We have to have and tick the checkbox. Are you happy now?
Yeah, very much.
I think it was
so
a great
you
event.
take the happiness now into the energy break, well deserved. I'll keep it short. 3:30 back here. Enjoy your break, and I'll see you soon back on the stage here. Thank you very much.